Hello, Susie.
Hello, everybody.
It's great to have you with us today, and in the joy of technology and in the joy of Zoom. It's great to have you here, and it's great to welcome you to Saturday Night Alive, our little Saturday night gathering where we come and listen to someone to tell us about their story. So let's talk about your story. So. What was your I suppose your formative connection in terms of your journey in faith?
Well, my dad grew up in a sect, and so I was pretty anti all things religion. And then my sister was killed by a drunk driver when she was 21.
Wow.
So a long time ago, but it was pretty awful. I was traveling in Europe back in the days when you were allowed to travel, but back in the days before internet or anything. And so my parents didn't know where I was. I hadn't been in touch for 3 weeks. I'd been away for months and months. And I literally rang that afternoon that it happened. So I knew, and so I came home. And then, instead of going and getting a job over in Europe, I got a job here. And I met this lovely boy. And it was only because of a lovely boy that when I found out he was a Christian, I didn't go running, but went along to church with him. And I remember I had this little notebook and I would scribble down all my questions, and, I'd read books and I'd argue with him. And, 30 years later, we're married. I became a Christian, And now I'm never going to say never again.
Fantastic. But that's a very, in many ways, a very traumatic start to the whole process.
Yeah. When I first started going to a church, it was with a friend from high school who I knew before he was a crazy Christian. So he invited me to go to church with him. And he said that when he'd heard that my sister died, he had gone to his home group Bible study and said, please can we pray for my friend that somehow, as a result of this tragedy, she'll come to know Jesus. And so they were all a bit shocked the first time I turned up.
Wow. So they were already praying for you in that situation already. Wow. Now you said that you grew up in a house where your dad was part of a sect. So you didn't really have any background in what was traditional church then.
No, Dad got thrown out when he went to university and started questioning their more bizarre practices. And so they shut him out. So I grew up not knowing any of my dad's family, and he became an alcoholic because of that. That's a dreadful thing to have happen to you, that your family rejects you. And so my family growing up was a broken mess. But yeah, the family history, mythology was, oh yeah, religion's bad. It does bad things to people. So yeah, my dad thought it was pretty funny when I decided to become a Christian, but even more so, I preach. I've been in ministry for most of my career, and his father was apparently a charismatic preacher, and so he just kind of rolls his eyes. His church now is AA. He's been sober for 30 odd years. In fact, it was my sister's death that was the thing that helped him stop. And he says that the AA program didn't work for him until he admitted that there's some kind of higher power. So it
really is part of the AA thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was started by Christians. Yeah, it was Christian doctors who started AA.
Yeah.
And they changed from using the word God to using the word higher power. But, the irony was not lost on my dad that it wasn't until he gave himself over to the higher power that the program worked for him.
Wow. And as you said, I mean, it is one of those places where wherever people come together in fellowship, and particularly in love, that's church. That's
exactly.
So whether church looks like what I'm sitting in, or whether church is a group where you only know each other by their first names, it's actually still church.
Yeah, and I've over the years I've realized, I go to my weekly Bible study group. Dad goes to his weekly AA meeting, and there are some similarities. and there are some things that they do better than us as well, I think. I think that in AA, they're much better at recognizing that they need help, and being humble about that and being willing to work on themselves. Whereas I think we can, you have to recognize that you need help to become a Christian, but then something happens. We go to church and suddenly, we feel a bit good about ourselves, and we start getting a little bit judgmental about
So a bit holier than thou kind of thing.
Yes, yeah,
okay. Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame, because we should be better at understanding that we need each other, that we need help, that we should be looking at the important stuff of life, that we should be looking at ourselves, rather than judging other people.
Yeah, I think sometimes the church gets that reputation, doesn't it? It kind of gets that reputation for being a bunch of hypocrites who only want to point fingers at everybody else.
Yeah.
And I suppose in some ways it's been quite sobering in the last number of years with things like the Royal Commission and that kind of thing, where all our dirty washing has kind of gone out there in front of everybody. It hasn't been helpful in terms of that, because I think people have said, you see, we told you. And so I suppose maybe a more humble approach would have been better in the first instance. But in terms of that, you've said that you kind of came from that broken space, but the healing has been there, and you've kind of sought to do the healing as part of your life in terms of you studied psychology, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But you then became involved in ministry. Tell us a little bit about how that involvement happened.
My dad was living overseas for most of, he and my mum divorced, and he lived in Malaysia and in Saudi Arabia and in the Philippines. And so I would go and visit him. And I got to see poverty as a young, impressionable person. And so there was a big part of me that wanted to do something to make the world better. And I'm sure it's, I was the oldest in a family of alcoholics. There's always one that becomes a social worker or something. But there is something in me that wants to make things the best that they can be. So I studied psychology thinking, okay, I want to help people. But when I became a Christian, it's like, oh, that actually still isn't going to be enough. So I actually went and studied theology as well. But then when I had my own children, I realized, oh, actually, this is what's really going to change the world. Working with kids is prevention rather than cure. It's, there's psychohistorians. It's a branch of psychology where they look at the dominant child rearing practice for a whole culture, and then they can predict the peacefulness or otherwise of that culture in a generation's time. So they've looked at Nazi Germany or the former Yugoslavia, why it's such terrible Balkan wars. And in both those cultures, the child rearing practices were pretty gruesome the generation before. So having my own kids, from a broken family, I never wanted to have kids because why would you? But having my own kids, seeing them grow up in a beautiful church community, I've been at my church for 30 years. I realized, oh, this is the thing that's going to make a difference. I realized I could help my kids to become people who could contribute to the world, who would be, more emotionally aware than I was as a child. And yeah, that kind of sent me off into children and family ministry.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, obviously the concept of children's ministry in Australia, certainly for the Uniting Church, is tricky because we're kind of running out of children. As far as members are concerned, a lot of our churches are more elderly now, and so we don't have all that many children in the congregations. And so the issue with it is for us is it's a case of what do we do? I mean, how do we even get connected with them to connect for them for church?
World Vision recently joined with George Barna, who's a big Christian researcher in the US, and they interviewed thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of young people, young adults all around the world who were leaving church, and they interviewed them, asked them, why have you left church? And because many of them had grown up in the church. But, you know, we mentioned hypocrisy before. That was one of their reasons. This young adult generation now want to be part of something. They're lonely. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to be part of something that will make a difference, and they care deeply about social justice issues. And the reason they left the church is because they didn't think that the church was doing anything about social justice issues. One thing that the Uniting Church has a great reputation for is caring about social justice issues. If you can find a way to say, hey, we are a great vehicle for helping you to make the changes in the world that you would like, I think that would be wonderful. That, in fact, is what attracted me to church, to Christianity, is I wanted to make a difference in the world. And I thought, oh, these are my people. These are the people that care about that as well. So after Children and Family Ministry, I did a master's degree and ended up working for TIER and then Baptist World Aid, so working for international aid and development organisations. And so my real sweet spot is seeing how we can get children and young people to have opportunities to make a difference in the world, whether it's poverty and injustice or climate change or what, you know, it's saving sad puppies, whatever it is. If we can get kids to think, oh, there's a problem in the world, I can do something about it, I can join in with people who are doing something about it, that will be really good for them, and that will be really good for society.
Yeah, look, I think that I've always thought that in terms of the Uniting Church is that we've always focused on social justice as being a very important pillar of this new denomination. But I suppose in some ways it's about how we communicate that, which is the issue. And I mean, we'll talk a little bit about your book after the break, but that's part of the communication issue. You mentioned your master's. Now, your master's is in conflict transformation. Is that correct?
Peace and conflict studies.
That's right. Was that through Sydney University?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes, because I've actually taught in that course.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I taught through that. I actually taught violence and war in Christianity and Judaism. But the interesting thing with that is that conflict is, of course, one of the big issues that we face. And I mean, you certainly would have had a fair amount of it within your upbringing and your connection with that. Conflict is, of course, becoming much more prevalent at the moment. I mean, we've seen a mass killing just in the last day or two in the UK, which is kind of unusual. I mean, when we think of mass killings, we kind of think of the US, but this happened just in a little village in the UK, and I think the youngest victim is only 4 years old. And when I look at that, I kind of say, well, what is it? What in your own experience and in your background, how do we deal with that issue of conflict? I know that's a very big question, but
it is a big question. I will come back to prevention rather than cure again, because we seem to have this mythology that, oh, it's just, you know, violence and war is part of the human condition, but it is not. There are pockets of cultures around the world that are absolutely peaceful. There's no violence at all. And violence, we know, is learned behaviour. And very small children who are exposed to violence, it literally gets hardwired into their brains. So the more we can do to support young families so that they will be raising kids in a peaceful environment, the more likely we are to end up having a peaceful world as well, which is the short answer to that very large question.
Sure, absolutely. And I mean, it is an enormous question, but I know it's one that's particular to you because it's also the things that you've been writing about. But I suppose part of it, for me, it goes back to that old saying that it takes a village to raise a child. I mean, I suspect that you would agree with that.
Yeah, for most of human history, we have lived in villages. And so if something bad happens in the 100 to 150 people that our brains are only evolved to manage, you know, if someone's house burns down, you know, Mrs. Jones, you can go and take her a casserole, you can go and help fix her roof. But the way we're living in our urbanized life now, our brain's on high alert all the time with so many people around. So we're kind of always stressed and mistrustful. And the greater our wealth inequality happens, the less social cohesion we're getting. So we're trusting each other less. And so we're being stripped away of our agency, our empowerment to actually fix problems in the world. And so that feels awful, and I'm a bit scared of all the time. There's been a terrible thing happen in the UK and I just want to go and watch Netflix. And so I think as a society we're devolving into this not caring about each other, not believing we can do anything about it, being depressed. Actually, you know, depression is going through the roof, and younger people are being, you know, given antidepressants. I think there's a correlation going on here.
So what's the antidote?
Well, my little antidote is that we try to raise kids who have a bit of a clue of what's going in the culture around them, and have a bit of a clue about how important it is to have good relational foundations. Kids who have a bit of a clue about how to do conflict resolution and are not scared of it. Kids who have a bit of a clue that there are things they can do to make the world a better place, and that actually that is way more fulfilling than, you know, some new thing that you could buy at the mall.
So I want to talk a little bit about then your book. Now, I can't show you the actual book because I don't have the paper version. There we go. I've got the Kindle version. So there we go. So yes, for those who are watching us today, you can get it in the paper version or you can get it in the Kindle version from that. It's called Raising Kids Who Care, Practical Conversations for Exploring Stuff That Matters Together. And I think Tim Costello has actually been a guest on Saturday Night Live, and he wrote, "This is a brilliant book." So, I mean, that's high praise in one little line. Tell me about some of the inspiration. You've already spoken about some of it, actually, but what's the inspiration for writing a book?
I started writing this book years ago. In fact, I've taught scripture. The first thing that I did as a Christian was went back to my own high school and started teaching scripture. And then when my kids went to school, I stepped all the way through with them teaching scripture. And then I was working for the Baptist Association. We produced a scripture curriculum. So, you know, I really got into it. And I would experiment on my classes, I have to admit. And I was amazed by these 8, 10, 12-year-old kids who understood big concepts. Maybe they couldn't name them as big concepts, but they understood justice, and they understood mercy, and they understood, you know, what is good and right and loving. And I had some really deep conversations with them, and you know, right back then they wanted to change the world, but they hadn't been given many opportunities. One really great story is I showed them a video. It was actually on ABC. It was just about a kid in Canada who had at primary school heard that if he raised $100, he'd be able to build a well for children in Africa who didn't have enough water. So he goes home and asks his parents, "Oh, can I do some chores around the house to earn some money?" And he swings his brother in, and you know, of course the parents, you know, help him to raise this money. He goes back to school, says, "Oh, I've raised $100." And the teacher says, "Oh, actually, no, darling, it was $1,000. And he's like, "Oh." And so he goes away and he gets more friends and more people, and he raises $1,000. And in fact, it becomes this whole foundation because so many people are impressed that this young kid could care about kids on the other side of the world. Well, when I showed this video in my scripture class to, you know, my son's classes and all their friends, they came up to me wanting to help. They wanted to find ways to help. At the time I was working for TIER, and TIER has a really useful gift catalogue. You know, you can buy a goat or a toilet and it will go to somebody overseas. And so they decided that they wanted to buy one of every single thing in the tier catalogue. Now I thought, oh no, it's like it added up to $5,500. I'm like, I'm a terrible mother. They're like never going to be able to do that. So I said, oh, all right, well, you know, how about it's nearly Christmas. Why don't you write to all the people that would give you a Christmas present, say, please, instead of giving me a present, could you give me something from the gift catalogue? Well, for the next 3 years, my sons got neither Christmas presents nor birthday presents. But after 3 years, they had raised that $5,500. And I talk about this as like it's a dance of parenthood. So I introduced them to the fact that there were kids who had needs. I introduced them to the fact that, you know, he's an inspiring person. You can do things. Then they had an idea, which I could have shut down, but instead I said, all right, well, let's talk about how we can make this happen. And then let me tell you, I was very generous with their Christmas and birthday presents for 3 years. And so it was like, I think that's what we need to do as parents and people who care about kids is be inspiring them and then encouraging them and seeking out their ideas and helping them come up. You know, kids are way more creative than we are, come up with ideas, but then facilitating that or enabling it and giving them opportunities. I don't know if you've heard of Voices for Justice. Yeah, so I was just cleaning up my desk today and came across a photo where our whole family went down one year to Parliament House, and we took our kids to meet these MPs, and our kids got to say, we think that Australia should help kids overseas so that they have everything that they need that we have as well. And I guess the book came out of me wanting to share those conversations with many more people. Now, I think the church does a really great job with kids. I've loved my kids growing up in the church, but I really feel for all the families that are outside the church that are often very nuclear, very, you know, lacking in extended family, very busy, and who just might not have what they need to have conversations like this with their kids.
Because I think the thing that I liked about the book particularly is that it's not, I mean, usually the Christian children's author is trying to convert everybody to become Christians, but that's really not what this book is about. And this book is not heavenly evangelical. So it's the kind of book that you could give to anybody, regardless of their position in terms of Christianity. Was that intentional?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's enough out there like that. There are a number. So Christians like you have been the ones that have been most interested in the book. But one of the questions I often get asked is this does it have a lot of Bible stuff in there? Is there a lot of jargon in there? Or is it something that I could give to a friend? And they're always delighted when I say, no, you could give this to a friend. Because for me, this is kingdom work. This is me blessing the world with you know, my family's grown up, you know, my current family has grown up in the church and been blessed by that. And I think that living according to kingdom values is the best way to live. But I think that that's something that we as Christians should shout from the rooftops. There's plenty of things that make the front page of the newspaper that we're bad at. We spoke about some of them earlier, but this is something we're good at. We're good at families. We're good at social justice. And I know kids who have grown up and as Christians, you know, their whole family's in the church and they've left the church, but this one guy in particular, he was studying political science, and I invited him to come to Voices for Justice with me, and he said, oh, but isn't it a Christian thing? And I'm like, no, you'll be welcome to come. And he said, these are my people. These Christians are the people who care about other people, who want to have these conversations that I want to have. And so, yeah, this book is to try and help families have maybe just a little glimpse of what kingdom living is like without them even knowing that's what it is.
And I think that's what I loved about what I loved about it as well, is that it's actually it's part book, but the other part, and in fact quite a big part of it, is workshop.
Yeah.
I mean, most of it is actually giving ideas for workshopping the idea, much more than just you giving us all your ideas and we go, oh, that's nice, and then we put it away and that becomes a part of the things. It's actually meant to be a workbook. It's kind of, I can imagine it's the kind of thing that you could use on a long trip, when we're allowed to actually ever do that again. You know, when you go on that long journey, to actually then start a conversation and connect it. I must say, one of the fun parts that I read was, do you like cheese?
Yes.
Now, of course, no one knows what I'm talking about, but from what I understand of it, the story actually was that the encouragement was to engage someone in conversation, and people find that hard to start off engaging someone in conversation. And so you encouraged your son to just start off with a simple question, like something like, you know, do you like cheese? And when they tried it, it worked. Is that right?
Yeah. My husband is a really great listener, but not a great talker. And so I made my kids practice on him. I thought, you can do it. But they started it. They said, how do you have a conversation? And I said, you ask questions. And they came up with the, do you like cheese? So it's a big family joke now.
But actually, I love it. I mean, one of the things that we try to do in the congregation, especially during COVID, is getting people to give someone a phone call. And just to find someone in the directory and just phone them. And I was just thinking, you know, a lot of people find it hard to do that because they don't know what to do, especially with a phone call, because that's even more difficult because the person is disembodied. You know, you can't see their face or anything like that. So there's a sense of how do I start that conversation? But I think maybe this is the way to go, is to actually just start off with something like, you know, do you like cheese? And then see where that takes you. I mean, you said in the book that it started a half an hour conversation. I think that would be quite fun in terms of the encouragement that we have. But I suppose it's really at the core, though, of this whole thing, is that unless we're talking to each other, what's happening? Nothing's there. And I think that's really what I love about the book. Do you find that you've had feedback from that in terms of people using it to start conversation?
That has been absolutely the best thing about writing the book. It's very hard to write a book. It's so exciting when I get messages from people telling me how they've used it. So some of them have been friends my age who have kids, you know, young adult kids, and they've practiced it, you know, for me really. And then they've been blown away that they've learned things about their kids that they never knew. They've started deep conversations that they'd never had before. In fact, one 40-year-old guy at church whose mother's in Switzerland, he got, you know, she got her to get a copy of the book as well. And then over Zoom, they followed one of the conversations in the book, because there are 40 conversations in the book, and they're quite structured. They're all structured in the same way. And you know, it gives you all the sort of prompts to start the conversation. So he had one of these conversations with his mum, and he texted me afterwards. He said, that was the first real conversation I've ever had with my mother. And he said it was beautiful. Okay. So, yeah. And then I've had it with young kids as well. There's one family who the dad said he had to bribe his kids to sit down and have the conversation, because I also say that the kids should lead the conversations as well, because we don't want it to be parents lecturing. And he got the kids to choose which conversation they'd like to talk about. They chose the climate change one, and they ended up talking for 2 hours. And at the end, as a family, they decided that the next car, they lease cars because of the way they work, that their next car would be electric. And I thought, that's it. I've changed the world already.
One car at a time. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, I think talking about the structure that you have, I like the structure too, because you kind of have the structure of a journey. And kind of before the journey starts, and then preparing for the journey, then the journey itself, and then kind of ending the journey. And I like that as a process for conversation, that conversation goes through that same process. How did you come up with that? Was that just an inspiration?
it was a gift from God, honestly. It was such a mess before I came up with that, because I had just a million ideas, and it was actually I was really struggling with it, and I reached out to an editor, and she read it and gave me kind of a big blanket overview of it. And she, just in one line of pages and pages, she said, oh, it'd be good if you had some kind of template for the conversations. And as soon as I came up with it, it all just fell into place.
Fit it in, yeah. It is one of those kind of miraculous moments, isn't it? Yeah. Now, the book actually does allude to something that you're going to do next, in terms of justice games. Is that still on the cards?
Yep. So when I worked for TIER, which is now TIER Fund, one of the things is education of Christians was what I was doing, and they were really great at having simulation games, so experiential learning. So they used to run these with adults or with youth groups, but I started running them with families. So I would have 100 people in a church hall, whole 25 families, and they'd be all sitting down on the floor pretending that they're living in a slum in India, and they're having to quickly make paper bags in newspapers into paper bags to sell at the shop, that they're getting rice for the week ahead, and then bad things would happen and so on. And I can remember this dad yelling at his young children to hurry up. And in the debrief afterwards, I said, oh, is that normal in your family? He's like, no. And he realized in that how stressful it would be to be so terribly poor, right? Which is exactly the whole point of it. And so I'm really sold out on experiential learning. And so I have this idea to run. I think it would be really great for churches. You could do this in your church, where you just have a family fun night, and you invite a whole lot of families to come. And I would have given you all the resources, in the same way that I give you all the resources for the conversation in the book. I'd give you the resources for some kind of experiential all-in game, and then everyone would go off into their families and have a conversation, pretty much like the conversations in the book, and they'd be themed. So one might be about poverty, but one might be about conflict resolution, and another one might be about consumerism, or I have a million ideas. I'm already thinking I've got a list for the next book, or the more
conversations. Oh well, okay. So that's fantastic, but I think you're right. That experiential learning is kind of a way which you can do it, and it becomes a fun night out, which isn't just playing board games. It's actually playing something that has got a justice component. It's got a real world component to it. That sounds fantastic. So when for yourself right now, in the midst of lockdown and COVID and the realities of that, what is your go-to space to cope?
Well, tap dancing. I started learning tap dancing at the beginning of last year, and had to do it in Zoom in the middle of, and we've just gone back to Zoom again. No, I don't know.
I suppose in a sense, isn't that exactly what it is in terms of mental health, is finding whatever our tap dancing is. Yeah. It won't be good for me, because it's never going to be with two left feet. I'm never going to do tap dancing, but it's about finding what we do that actually gives us that sense of release and empowerment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I suppose also to give it to our kids, is the big thing, because I think we forget them in the midst of all of this process.
The families on my street are all much younger than my families now, and they all take their little camping chairs out onto the nature strip, and they talk to each other across the road or across the driveway, and the kids ride their bikes around the street. And it's a lovely creative response to what is a difficult time.
That's right. And understanding that, in fact, our kids are going through the same emotions we are, but actually finding fewer places to actually exercise them and deal with them, especially because we're not maybe talking as much as we should be in some places. So, yeah.
which comes back to my book. Like, this is a great time to be using the conversations in the book, because I think we forget to talk about the important things in life. I think we forget to teach our babies about the things that are going on in the world and what are happening in the world, because they're not babies. They grow up faster than I think we realize.
And I think they understand far more than what we think they do,
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have a chat with you, Susy. I mean, look, that's taken us 40 minutes and it's no problem at all. So thank you very much for your time tonight and for sharing it with us. And I do wish you all God's blessing on the book and the conversations that book will engender. And may it be not just one electric car, but may it be a whole fleet that brings about the changes into the world. So thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. You're great conversationalist yourself.
Well, I'm glad. Well, look, and one of the things we can do is when one day when we're allowed to see each other in person, we might have you over to do something in person instead as well.
That'd be great.
Lovely to have you tonight. God bless.
Bye.
Bye-bye.